Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the best games when it comes to giving players options in approaching combat. From a full party of 4 members, to extremely powerful consumable items and illithid powers, and if all else fails, there are a multitude of ways to cheese encounters. But what if you didn't have any of those options? What if you, as a single character with no party members, no consumables, no illithid powers, and only honest turn-based combat, had to clear Baldur's Gate's hardest difficulty? Surely, it can't be that hard, right? Most people, after dying 36 times and losing hundreds of hours of game time, might think to themselves, maybe I should give up, or at the very least change some of my restrictions. But I am not most people. Instead, I create the same character, a Wood Elf War Cleric, for the 37th time, and try again. I blitz through the Nautiloid and begin my run how most playthroughs start out, by escaping a crashing ship and waking up on a beach. I escape a crashing ship, wake up on a beach, pick up everything that isn't bolted down, and send a bunch of homeless people to my camp like the good Samaritan that I am. Now, most people in their solo runs probably avoid taking fights at level 2 because you are extremely weak. But one of my rules is to not overlevel the encounters, so I, of course, immediately get to fighting the introductory encounters. First up, the Intellect Devourers. These guys are pretty strong, but there's only 3 of them, and so with a surprise attack opener, I can easily mop these guys up. Similarly, the next encounter on my list is the Ruined Bandits. And while the bandits outside are an easy combat thanks to the conveniently located cinder block, the bandits inside the ruins are another story. I fail the deception check to get into the ruins, which causes all of the bandits to stand at attention watching the door. So, in order to get a better angle on the fight, I circle back outside and go in through the hole in the floor. This fight is extremely luck reliant, as it is a 6-on-1 in close quarters. The conveniently located oil barrel does do a decent amount of heavy lifting, instantly taking that 6v1 down to a 4v1, but the fight is far from over. I kite the remaining bandits around, utilizing the doors and sanctuary to slowly whittle away at their remaining health bars. Until I eventually emerge victorious. Proceeding further into the ruins, I disarm the skeletons before stealthily removing most of the scribes. With the scribes gone, all that's left is to engage the skeleton warrior in honorable combat, and let the turn-based montage do its thing. Literally, not even close. With the skeletons defeated, I move on to the grove, defeat the goblin raiders, and make my way inside. I sell my collection of items and talk to various grove residents before heading back out to continue my run. I generally avoid picking difficult fights at level 3, as I intend on challenging the vast majority of the boss fights at level 4. So, in preparation for those upcoming combats, I pick off the goblins under the grove, pick up an important friend who will be helping out a lot later in this run, and talk my way through the goblins in the Blighted Village. I then head towards Joaquin's Rest to save Counselor Floric, and to have the waypoint available for later. I head back down the Risen Road and clean up the newborn gnolls on the road, but importantly, I intentionally let the normal hyena escape and alert the other gnoll group. This will cause the group of gnolls to move down the road, which will be useful for when I circle back to defeat them later. The Gnoll encounters are a little too much for my character at her current level, but I still want to get the missing shipment inside the cave. So, I sneak around through the back entrance and steal the box before making my escape and heading back to Walking's Rest. I then go down to the Zenterm outpost and deliver the missing shipment to Xeris. This allows me to purchase the Titan String Bow. This bow is extremely powerful, but seeing as unlocking its power would require me to use strength elixirs, it will go into my reserve items for the time being. With all my business with the Zent taken care of, I strike a deal with the ogres to have them as an ally for later, and kill a few more goblins in order to hit level 4. And now that I'm level 4, I'm ready to start taking on some of the major encounters, starting with the Gnolls. But before I just start killing things, let me actually explain the strategies I'll be using for the upcoming series of encounters. For my level 4 combats, I'll be swapping between 2 builds, composed of 1 level in War Domain Cleric, and then either 3 levels in Swordsbard or 3 levels in Assassin. These class setups allow me to deal the maximum possible damage at level 4 thanks to the double attack from Slashing Flourish ranged, or the guaranteed critical hits from Assassin. And with my class setup explained, let's resume where we left off. I use my surprise turn to immediately burst the Gnoll Hunters before using my Wood Elf's increased movement speed to outpace the melee Gnolls and slowly whittle them down. After defeating the Gnolls, I swap to the Swordsbard build and go to the next encounter on my list, the Owlbear. The Owlbear has the first legendary action that I run into on this run, and unfortunately for the Owlbear, she isn't going to get to demonstrate what it does. With the Owlbear down, I take a quick visit to the Goblin camp to pick up a couple of useful items for my character, before heading back to the Risen Road to take on the False Paladins of Tyr. These guys can easily end your run if you let the Paladin close the gap on you, or get held personed. So in hindsight, I probably should have KO'd the caster to avoid this risk, but if it works, it works. Continuing along, I swap back to Assassin and go pay the Gnolls a final visit. I employ the same strategy as before, one-shotting the Hunters and giving the remaining Gnolls the runaround. Although, I will say, this time there were some complications.
Good hands.
Other than the fight getting reset, actually it got reset a few times, I eventually defeat the Gnolls. With another fight checked off the list, it's time to go down the well in the Blighted Village for the final major fight in this series of battles. I make short work of the initial group of spiders before proceeding to the Matriarch's chamber. I preemptively clear the spider's eggs to avoid getting overwhelmed in combat, and then take on the Queen. The Spider Queen really likes standing on her webs, making it very easy to continuously drop her for massive amounts of fall damage. After defeating the spiders, I quickly visit the Underdark to grab Phalar Alave, and then set off for the swamp. I take care of Ethel's redcaps, and possessed minions, before skipping Ethel for now, because I'm pretty sure she'd fold me at level 4. Instead, I go kill the Mephits and Woads on the south side of the swamp. These guys can get out of hand pretty quickly if you aren't careful. But, fortunately, the Woads can't jump, so I can ignore them until the end of the fight by jumping across the river. I read the letter and return to the grove to expose Kaga. I explicitly don't try to convert her, as I want to kill her for the item that she carries on her person. This necklace is going to be a very useful damage additive in our run, so it's important that we pick it up. I then return to the Goblin camp and pick off a few goblins in order to hit level 5. At level 5, I take the Alert feat. in order to outspeed Auntie Ethel, who I'll be fighting next. I free Mayrina and use Volo's Eye to reveal her, which reminds me, I got Volo's eye surgery sometime in the combat montage. Kinda forgot to mention that. I then utilize all my damage increasing buffs and deal as much damage to Ethel as I can. I'm very careful not to deal too much damage though, so that I can force her to surrender and receive the Haghair buff to increase my dexterity to 18. With Ethel down and my character now level 5, I've done most of the stuff I wanted to do on the surface, so I return to the Underdark to continue my adventure there. First up in the Underdark, I take on the Spectator. I make sure to sanctuary myself before walking up to avoid being killed on the surprise turn. I also utilize Scratch to help break the Drow out from being charmed. After the Spectator, I swap to full Battlemaster Fighter and take on the Minotaurs. I make sure to avoid putting myself near ledges so that I don't get gored off the map. I then get ambushed by the Bulette, although I don't think the Bulette knew who was really doing the ambushing in this situation. Before proceeding to the Myconid colony, I speak to Omelum and then go to the Arcane Tower, where I'll be acquiring a few more very powerful items for my build. I invis past the turret and read this book to avoid having to fight Bernard and receive the Guiding Light Ring from him. I additionally break this chair and acquire the Club of Hill Giant Strength, the missing piece I needed for the Titan String puzzle. With this club in combination with the Titan String bow, I can start dealing even more insane amounts of damage in combat. I also go to the basement floor and pick up the Staff of Arcane Blessing, a very powerful staff for caster builds, which, while I'll mostly be doing martial builds in this run, there are a few fights where I'll be swapping to a caster to make my life easier. I return to Omelum to complete his quest, and then recruit Glut as a temporary companion. I have Glut resurrect the Bulette, and I use the Bulette to clear out the remainder of the Underdark. With the Underdark cleared, I dispose of Glut, and then head back up to the surface to defeat the Githyanki patrol. I call the ogres I recruited earlier for help, and while they tank for me, I kill off the Githyanki from the sidelines. With the Gith defeated, the only thing left for me to do on the surface is to finally finish clearing out the Goblin camp. So, I head to the Goblin prison and free Halsin, quickly respec the wizard for a moment, and introduce the courtyard to the power of Fireball, and then isolate and eliminate each of the Goblin leaders. I do choose to knock out Minthara so I can save her later, and Jor Ragzlin kinda punted me off the rafters, because I wasn't being as careful as I maybe should have been. With the Goblin leaders defeated, I'm now fully done with everything on the surface. So, I return to the Underdark and make my way to Grymforge. I avoid the boat fight, since I'd rather not risk getting pushed into the lake. And once in Grymforge, I strike a deal with Elder Brithbar, grab the smoke powder satchels, and break Nier out of the cave-in. With Nier freed, I side with Brithbar and play on the outskirts of the fight to avoid taking on any unnecessary risk. Once Nier is defeated, I collect his head for the Myconids, have Brithvar free the gnomes, and recruit Barkus to my camp, since he sells a very important item in Act 2 that I need to get from him. With me no longer being on a timer to save Nier, I go around and clean up all the random fights around Grymforge, hitting level 6 in the process. And with that, it's now time to take on the final boss before I move on to the mountain pass, Grym. Now, while I could just sit up top and throw stuff down at him to kill him safely, that's no fun at all. So instead, I'm gonna fight him on ground level. The strategy I have for beating him utilizes the Forge Hammer and a mechanic to this fight that I don't know if many people know about. For my build, I go 1 Cleric and 5 Eldritch Knight. And while Eldritch Knight may seem like an odd choice, it is because for my strategy, I need both access to Mage Hand, as well as Action Surge and Extra Attack, making Eldritch Knight my only option. I summon Scratch and the Mage Hand and have them both sneak at the edge of the ring. I also make sure to enter turn-based mode so my Mage Hand doesn't time out. I then precast Sanctuary and begin the fight. I immediately jump across and place myself directly under the hammer. I'm very particular about where I stand as I'm trying to lure Grym into a specific location. What I'm trying to do is maneuver Grym so he has 1 foot under the hammer and 1 foot in the lava. This puts Grym in a position where he will be able to be both made superheated and slammed by the hammer in the same turn. Once I get Grym in position, I stand between the lava valve and the hammer, and utilize all of my actions as well as my Mage Hand out of combat to repeatedly turn the lava valve and the hammer lever, comboing Grym and killing him in 1 turn. With Grym down, I clean up the mephits and claim my adamantine armor prize. And now, it's finally time to say farewell to both the Underdark and the Wilderness as I proceed to the Mountain Pass. In the Mountain Pass, I immediately head to the monastery and take the back entrance into the creche. I talk my way past the guards and do a bit of shopping with the quartermistress before heading back out into the monastery for some pest control. I clear out the various forms of fauna present all over the monastery before returning to the creche to begin the removal of the pests present there as well. Clearing the Githyanki does pose a little bit of risk as they are formidable opponents, but as long as I am able to keep each group isolated from each other, they aren't too difficult to deal with safely. After hitting level 7 while clearing, I swap to 1 War Cleric and 6 Swordsguard and prepare to challenge the Inquisitor. I make sure to go back up to the upper monastery and receive the Morning Lord's Radiance buff to amp my damage for this fight. And now, it's time for the actual fight. This fight is one of the most difficult in the game, since, if left unchecked, the Inquisitor can overwhelm you with his psionic swords. And as such, he needs to be eliminated first and as fast as possible. There's just one problem with that idea: the Githyanki parry. This ability completely guts most martial builds' damage, especially because if you try to open the fight by attacking him, he gets to parry 2 times in a row, back to back. This is where everyone's favorite best boy in the realms comes into play. Using Scratch, I can have him open the fight and surprise all the other Gith besides the Inquisitor, who has Perfect Sentry. The Inquisitor has an opening move on his first turn where he teleports up to his vantage point and links everyone in the room to raise his AC. And thus, he does not kill Scratch and end the combat immediately. I can now safely enter combat with all my actions intact. I next have Scratch walk up next to Wargaz and take an attack of opportunity. This removes the Inquisitor's reaction, thus meaning he can now no longer parry on this turn. With his parries gone and all my actions intact, I am now free to DPS check him and immediately take him down. With Wargaz down, I clean up the rest of the fight, thus finishing off the crash. On my way out, I grab the Blood of Lathander and start making my way towards Act 2. But not before meeting the final roadblock of Act 1, the Death Shepherds. Because there are a lot of adds and the Shepherds can revive each other, my current builds aren't going to do this fight very easily. So, it's time to swap off a martial build temporarily and debut the first real caster build of this run. My caster setups vary based on the combat, but they usually contain some combination of 2 to 5 levels in Tempest Cleric, 3 to 8 levels in Storm Sorcerer, or 2 to 7 levels of Divination Wizard. For this particular fight, I'll be going with 2 Tempest Cleric and 5 Storm Sword. I use Minor Illusion to group the enemies up before pre-casting Haste on myself and create water on the group of enemies. This makes them all vulnerable to lightning damage. This, I can cast Lightning Bolt on them, removing the entire group in one fell swoop. Now that the way is clear, I bid Act 1 farewell and take my first steps into the Shadow-Cursed lands. The first thing I do in Act 2 is, of course, go to acquire the Moon Lantern from Karnus, because there is a 0% chance I will be fiddling with trying to carry a light source for any amount of time. I lightning bomb the convoy before calling Karnus over and giving him similar treatment. With the lantern in hand, I free Dolly and say goodbye to ever having to think about the Shadow Curse. I make my way towards Last Light, as it's time to acquire a bunch of new and powerful gear. I pick up the UNT Scale Mail and Evasive Shoes to raise my AC, a pair of gloves to increase my DPS output, and, most importantly, the Gloves of the Automaton from Barkus. These gloves are going to prove absolutely pivotal for the remainder of the run, as they give me a way to get guaranteed advantage on my attacks. With my new equipment in hand, it's time to do a few combats to test them out, starting with the Meanlocks. These guys are deceptively difficult, since they have a fear aura in addition to all of their attacks having a chance to paralyze. This means there's a very real chance of getting paralyzed and game overed by these guys. But, fortunately, I managed to beat them without getting paralyzed and mauled. I next take on this group of Shadow Mastiffs in order to receive a very nice ring. After the Mastiffs, I take out this group of trees, who get a little too close to killing me for a random, non-important encounter, but it is what it is. Finally, for this series of combats, it's time to defend Last Light. And I really don't want to mess this one up, because losing access to the traders here would be a major nuisance. I barricade Isabel's room in order to help keep her safe, recast a bunch of buffs, including casting Sanctuary on her, and begin the siege defense. I immediately blow up Marcus, and then get to waiting to take my turn as all 200 NPCs involved slowly take theirs. Larian, if you're listening to this, please add some sort of speed up toggle in combat. I beg of you. Waiting through these 50 NPC combats will be the death of me. Please. Anyways, after I eventually defeat the ghouls, I head to Moonrise Towers, eliminating some measles and saving Roland along the way. At Moonrise, I pick up the Drapethroat Glaive, another damage additive I can add to my weapon attacks by dropping my weapon on the floor and casting Elemental Weapon on it. After finishing my second round of shopping, I head back into Reithwin and go to the Masons Guild, dealing with the shadows and claiming my prize, the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. Any experienced Baldur's Gate player can tell you exactly how useful this helmet is, and I'm no exception. This helmet is going to be extremely useful throughout my run, though probably not in the way you would expect it to be, but we'll get to that later. For now, it's back into Reithwin to start clearing out all the combats around town. First up, the Toll House lady, whose name I don't know how to say. This fight is pretty simple. Just be sure to remove any gold from your inventory before you challenge her so you don't get one-shot. And then, she's honestly not very difficult to deal with. I then cross the town square, taking care of the group of undead present there, before heading on to the House of Healing to deal with the next storm. Taking on Malice, I instead of focusing him, choose to focus all of the nurses first, since the nurses carry a paralyzing poison that I would rather not have to deal with. Malice does continuously revive the nurses, but they can easily be put back down while keeping Malice at a safe distance until I eventually defeat him. After Malice is down, I head over towards the Githyanki ambush and ambush the ambushers. I burst the Inquisitor and one of the Rangers, and utilize Fear to effectively nullify the warriors. After eliminating the Gith, I go to the last Thorm and clear out his ads. I don't kill him just yet, as I currently lack the means to do so effectively, so instead, I leave to prepare for one of the most annoying fights in this run, the Halsin portal defense. First things first, I pick up the Darkfire shortbow from Dammon. This isn't actually that relevant for this particular fight, but I figured I'd mention it here since I did happen to buy it right before this fight. I then respec to a caster build with 2 levels in Paladin, 1 level in Wizard, and 5 levels in Cleric. The Cleric levels are to acquire Spirit Guardians, an absolutely pivotal spell for this strat. I also use the Wizard level to scribe some nice AoE spells like Fireball and Ice Storm. I take the Dual Wielder feat and equip Phalar Alluve and the Blood of Lathander for the AoE Undead Blind and Sunbeam, as they are both very useful in this fight. Next up, I build a barrier around the location where the archers spawn from. This will slow them down since they are by far the biggest threat to the portal. Then, I precast Spirit Guardians and begin the defense. Because of Spirit Guardians, I can ignore most of the lesser enemies and instead focus my attention on the bigger threats. I also summon a spiritual weapon to draw some aggro and deal some additional damage. I then spend the rest of the combat utilizing the many AoE spells in my arsenal to clear away the undead. And it really does come down to the wire, but I do barely manage to keep the portal alive long enough to win the fight. With the portal fight over, I go back to finish off Visibald, slowly kiting him and whittling him down with spells. And now it's time for stage 1 of clearing out Moonrise Towers, the Prison Break. I start out with wiping out all the guards in the prison. And to be honest, these guards shouldn't be taken lightly, since a lot of them are paladins who can absolutely one-shot you if you get unlucky or take them too lightly. I then free the prisoners, and head back out into the Shadowlands to fight Oliver and complete Halsin's quest. The Oliver fight is actually pretty risky, since his legendary action creates pretty large areas of difficult terrain that deal non-negligible amounts of damage. But I managed to keep my Spirit Guardians up through the damage, and pretty cleanly am able to clear the ads and successfully defeat Oliver. After dealing with Oliver, I go and take on the Shadow Cursed Mound. Now, if this was after patch 6, I'd probably go into this fight with a more clear-cut strategy. But, because this is pre-patch 6, I actually just winged this fight, and I still almost die here. So don't disregard how strong this thing can be. After defeating the mound, I go back to the towers and save Minthara. I specifically avoided interacting with her until after I had completed Halsin's quest, in order to avoid conflicts between the two of them. Now, it's time to start wrapping up Act 2, and so I head to the Gauntlet of Shar. Dealing with the Shar and portals is not that hard, and so I move to take out Yrgir. I instantly delete Yrgir pretty easily, And despite my haste concentration getting broken, I actually managed to dodge pretty much all the attacks while lethargic and clean up the rest of the Maraguns. With your gear down, I finish all of the Shar and Trials, and then move to fight Balthazar, since I'd much rather fight him here than in the Shadowfell. For the Balthazar fight, it's time for me to re-bring up the Helm of Arcane Acuity. If you look closely at the specific wording of Battle Acuity, you may notice that it says you just have to deal damage with the weapon to gain the Acuity. Not that you actually have to be in combat, nor that you need to deal damage to a creature. This means to prep for a fight as a caster, I can attack random objects to stack my Arcane Acuity before I actually enter combat, allowing me to enter with full Arcane Acuity stacks. Utilizing this strategy, I stack the Arcane Acuity to guarantee my spells will hit, and use my lightning damage burst strat to immediately make short work of Balthazar. With Balthazar down, I'm almost ready to enter the Shadowfell. But before I do, I'm going to clear out Moonrise Towers. This is for two main reasons. Number one, I really don't want to sit through the super long turns of 50 NPCs during the tower siege. And two, I want to keep Jaheira alive, and keeping her alive in that siege fight is really annoying. So I get to isolating the various guards around Moonrise and slowly taking them out one by one. With Moonrise cleared, I have one last stop before I enter the Shadowfell. I revisit the town square and enter the Sharan Sanctuary to acquire the stat buffs from these statues. Each of these statues gives you a +5 to Wisdom, Charisma, and Intelligence respectively until your next long rest, so I will be utilizing these for when I take on Ketheric. With everything prepared, I enter the Shadowfell, breathe a Night Song, and then head to Moonrise to confront Ketheric. When I get to Ketheric, I immediately take the difficult Intimidation and Deception checks to make Ketheric surrender, as passing these will be a very important step for defeating Myrkul later on. I burst Ketheric with some help from Dame Aelin, clear out the remaining adds, and prepare to enter the Mindflayer colony. But before I enter, it's time for another respec into a build I made specifically for the Myrkul fight. Myrkul is, at least in my opinion, the most difficult fight in the game for solo runs, since it is the only fight where you don't have any way to escape should things go wrong. This fight is also, of course, even more difficult for me given my many restrictions. But I came up with a strategy that I am very confident is so good it would still succeed just as hard even if I had fought Myrkul post patch 6. So, what is this build? First off, I take 3 levels in Assassin. Now, when most people think of Assassin, they usually associate it being multi-classed with other martial builds. But what if I multi-classed it with the Tempest Cleric and Sorcerer setup instead? So, with 2 levels in Tempest Cleric and 4, soon to be 5, levels in Storm Sorcerer, I'll show you exactly what this combo is capable of. After I enter the colony, I clear out various enemies in order to hit level 10, and get my last level in Sort. And then free Mizora and Zevlor, and head to finally take on Myrkul. Starting out, I summon Scratch, as I need him to free the Night Song. I then begin a series of actions and spells to set up. I create 2 additional Sorcerer points, break a bunch of objects to stack my Arcane Acuity, precast Haste, summon a Mage Hand, and then attack the Mindflayer to surprise the enemies and start combat. Now, you may notice that even though I just attacked them, I still get pulled into conversation with Ketheric. This is one of the 2 quirks of this fight I'm taking advantage of, as this interaction lets me persuade Ketheric into giving up and allows me to skip straight to phase 2. The other quirk I'm taking advantage of is that Myrkul maintains the surprise status as long as Ketheric dies during the surprise turn of combat. This means my assassin bonuses are still active against Myrkul. Before I can start dealing damage though, I send Scratch to go stealthily free the Night Song, and then use my Mage Hand to move some chests in front of the ladders up to Myrkul. This is part of a failsafe plan in case everything goes wrong, but it doesn't end up being relevant here. Now that all my setup is complete, it's time to actually start attacking Myrkul. I cast Create Water to make Myrkul vulnerable to lightning damage, and then, actually, I'll just let the damage speak for itself. I think you can see why I don't think patch 6 stops my strategy. With Myrkul down, Act 2 comes to a close, and thus begins the final act. Act 3 starts out just how you'd expect, with this annoying Gith ambush. I sanctuary myself and head straight for the portal to enter the Astral Prism. I make my way for the skull, and as much as I don't like the Emperor, I am, unfortunately, forced to save him. I immediately burst the lead honor guard, and then utilize Hold Person to CC the remaining Gith, allowing myself and the Emperor to finish them off. With the Emperor saved, I of course reject his tadpole offer, as I do not need any of his silly powers. I then exit the prism and take my first steps into Act 3 proper. In Act 3, I have a whole lot to do, so I'm gonna speedily cover most of the boring stuff so I can get to the more interesting encounters faster. I start by taking on a whole bunch of non-important easy combats all around Rivington and the lower city in order to hit level 11. After which, I decide now would be a good time to deal with Dolor. I approach this fight carefully, using Sanctuary on myself before entering the fight, as Dolor carries Paralysis Poison that he can easily use to kill you, and I would rather not take that risk. I utilize Glyph of Warding Sleep to keep the group under control as I clean up the fight. With Dolor defeated, I take his belongings and head to the Murder Tribunal. At the Tribunal, I choose to become an Unholy Assassin, as this is the only way for me to acquire 3 extremely important items for my build. Once I become an assassin, I go to the Echo of Abizigal and purchase 3 things: the Ballless Armor, Raider Flesh Gloves, and Dolor Amaris. These 3 items are absolutely crucial to taking the DPS of my build to absolutely absurd levels. So, with these items in hand, why don't I go and demonstrate just how much damage I can now deal. I head to the Elfsong Tavern to take on the Gith in the Emperor's hideout. I surprise the Gith and utilize my new items to immediately delete almost all of them. I also make use of a mechanic with the Ballless Armor, in which I position myself in the small window where enemies are affected by the Aura of Murder, but I don't receive disadvantage on my ranged attacks. This lets me double my ranged piercing damage with no downside. I then head back out into the city to clear out a bunch more non-important encounters for XP. I additionally, in the process of hunting for easy XP, quickly return to Wyrmsrot Castle to clear all of Balduran's trials. And, while doing them, I spend like 3 minutes trying to do the chess puzzle legitimately. And to be honest, as I'm rewatching the footage to record this voiceover, am I just stupid? It's so obvious what the correct moves are. Like, come on past me, figure this shit out already, Jesus Christ. After I finally figure it out though, I claim my XP and return to the lower city to attempt to save Volo, with a major emphasis on attempt. Sorry Volo, I didn't know they actually fixed this fight to have the fire damage tick properly. My bad bro. Even with Volo getting sent to orbit, I still hit level 12 during that fight and can finally complete my build. So, for my completed build, my class levels are as follows. Previous viewers of my channel might recognize this build as being very similar to a certain build but with a few alterations. I swapped out the original Gloomstalker levels for 2 Fighter and 1 War Cleric, as this allows me to maximize the number of attacks I can take during my surprise turn. I'm not going to go into all the details of my build here, but the general idea is surprise the enemies, stand next to them to make them vulnerable to piercing, but not so close as to get disadvantage on my attacks, and then delete my foes from existence. So, enough talk about my build, it's time to showcase it in action against some actual boss fights. First up on the chopping block, it's time to pay Cazador a visit. I infiltrate Cazador's mansion, remove his minions, and make my way into the dungeon to face off against the man himself. Unfortunately, Cazador has alert, and so I won't get to show off the full power of my build just yet. But even at half power, it's still enough to make quick work of him. With the boss down, I then begin the very long, arduous process of clearing out the remaining adds. I'll kill them all eventually. Now that I'm finally done with that, next up is Lorroakin. I get Aelin and Roland in on the fight, and honestly, they're more of a hindrance than a help, since they prevent me from surprising the fight, and I also now have to worry about their safety. But, even with that added level of complication, I beat Lorroakin and head back to Worm's Rock to go and take care of the first potentially difficult boss, Ansur. It's going to be very ironic that I called him difficult given what I'm about to do to him, but I do mean it when I say he's difficult, as he is one of the bosses in this act that has the highest odds of killing me. Now normally, I would trigger a fight like this while invisible to avoid getting pulled directly into combat, but the Ansur fight trigger actually breaks invis concentration, so I can't use that here. Instead, I just immediately run away on the fight start, so I can re-enter and surprise Ansur. Now that he's surprised, let me show you what my build is actually capable of. Yeah, I do a small amount of damage. Just a teeny bit. After Ansur, I head to the Blushing Mermaid to deal with Ethel again. I lack any method of anti-heal to make dealing with the mushrooms easier, so instead, I just brute force the mushrooms down, turn invisible to exit combat, and then knock Ethel out to free Vanra. I then go to the counting house to meet a certain bald-headed ranger and follow his traces into the sewers. Once there, I defeat him and his handlers in order to add another freeloader to my camp. With Minx saved, and many of the bosses defeated, I decide that now would be as good a time as any to take on one of my side challenges for this run. In addition to my large rule set, I also gave myself some additional challenges to try and complete in my run. One of them was to try and achieve a good ending for all the companions, hence why I put so much emphasis on completing Halsin's quest and saving Minthara, Jaheira, and Minsk. The other challenge is to successfully save every single hostage present in the Iron Throne. Now, when I set that challenge, I wasn't even sure if it was going to be possible to do. But after many hours of planning and coming up with a strategy, I came up with something that I think just might work. I respec to a caster build and pick up spells like Misty Step, Haste, Mage Hand, and Dimensional Door, as these will all allow me to cover more ground and assist the prisoners as I maneuver through the throne. With my levels and gear in check, I hop in the submersible and head to the prison itself. The first thing I do upon arrival is to begin my super long series of preparations, including summoning my mage hand, which is able to pull levers and fly, making it the perfect helper for this situation, and twin casting haste on myself and the mage hand. With my buffs prepared, I exit the submersible and am greeted by Omelum. Way earlier in my run, I made sure to do Omelum's quest, and intentionally did not give Lady Esther the Gith Egg, as this causes Omelum to be present in the Iron Throne, making my odds of success significantly higher. I descend the ladder and immediately burst the nearest Sahuagin. I head down the southern corridor first, prioritizing getting Omelum out as soon as possible. Additionally, this is the corridor that all the Sahuagin will be spawning from, so the sooner I can clear it out, the better. I use my mage hand to free the prisoners in the main room and then head down the western hall. On my next turn, I successfully free Omelum, and use my mage hand to free some of the prisoners in the western room. This is where I run into an unforeseen issue. Omelum has access to a move he can use once per turn called Teleport to the Submersible. This allows him to TP himself and an ally directly to safety. Now, what I didn't account for was that when I use this move on my character to take her back to the center, it would also move all my summons to the sub as well. Because of this, my plan starts to fall apart a little, and I'm forced to improvise. As all of the prisoners in the southern hallway have made it to safety, I seal the southern door, locking the majority of the Sahuagin away from the prisoners. I then Misty Step down the western hall to clear out the enemies and free the remaining prisoners there. I send Omelum, Scratch, and the Mage Hand all down the eastern hall, as the final prisoners are all there. I join my allies in the eastern hallway, and use Magic Missile to open all the cages and deal damage to the remaining fish before having Omelum finish it off. The Duke gets held by Missoura, and with only one round remaining before the whole place comes crashing down, I need to ensure that I also don't die here. I do what I can to help the remaining prisoners escape using Dimensional Door to teleport the farthest prisoner to the exit before getting to safety myself. I have Omelum escort the Duke, and then all I can do is watch and hope that the remaining prisoners have enough movement speed to escape on their own. And so, yeah, I just barely managed to full clear the Iron Throne. Since I've just freed the prisoners, I decide to continue along with that questline and head to the Steelwatch Foundry. I clear out the Banites, saving what Gondians I can, but I'm not trying too hard to save these guys, as they sometimes willingly stand next to exploding Steelwatchers, and I cannot take responsibility for their lives when they themselves don't seem to want to live. I clear out the factory, and then, with only this many spell slots remaining, decide that I think I can beat the Steelwatcher Titan without long resting. I buff up and enter the fight. I immediately cast Chain Lightning as many times as I can, which clears away all of the Hellfire Watchers and just leaves the Titan to take on. Titan enters its defensive protocol, and I fortunately still have enough spell slots to finish it off. With the Titan dead, I destroy the factory, overthrow Wolbrin because that guy sucks, and then head for the House of Grief to defeat the Sharans. I clear out the guards outside and enter without going through the heart mapping. Once inside, I use Minor Illusion to gather the guards at the outer edge so I can eliminate some of them without starting the full-on combat. I then use my summon to surprise the enemies, and enter combat by upcasting Create Water. I utilize Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt to clear out all of the Sharans. With the Sharans dead, I quickly let Shadowheart free her parents and then visit the Mirror of Loss to acquire a permanent +2 boost to my dexterity. After the House of Grief, I decide to visit the other house and go to the House of Hope to take on Raphael. I lurk around the cliff's edge of the house to reach the boudoir and take out Harlip. I then grab the password and head to the archive to grab the hammer. Hammer in hand, I make my way across the house, taking out the denizens along the way, and head into Hope's cell to free her. I almost kill myself fighting the prison guards since I forgot that these enemies reflect radiant damage, but while mathing out the damage to avoid killing myself, I take out the guards and free Hope. Now, the only thing left to do is take on Raphael. I enter the dialogue with myself and Hope both invisible, thus avoiding starting combat immediately. I send Hope far away as she's more of a hindrance than a help for me, and then buff up and surprise the enemies. Unfortunately for me though, when I surprise the combat, only half the enemies get pulled into combat immediately, so I can't do the entire thing in one turn like I was planning on. But even with that setback, I still managed to show Raphael who is really the cat in his metaphor. Before clearing out the remaining Cambions over the next few turns. With Raphael defeated, there's only Mystic Carrion to take on before I finally challenge the other Netherstone holders. In order to kill Carrion, I need to get his funerary urns, and ironically, this fight against the undead guarding the jars is significantly more difficult than the actual fight against Carrion himself. I slowly clear out the undead, break his urns, and make extremely quick work of the man himself. Now that the side bosses are all dead, it's time to take on Gortash and Orin and begin wrapping up this challenge. First up, Gortash. Now, considering Gortash doesn't have the alert feat, I don't think what's about to happen to him will be that surprising. With Gortash dead and buried, it's now time for the more difficult of the two chosen, Orin. Considering I am not the Dark Urge, the Orin fight is actually quite risky, as I need to break through her unstoppable stacks to even deal damage to her. And if she ever doesn't get to use her legendary action, I could be at risk of being instantly killed. So, I decide I'm just going to bypass that issue by killing her in one turn. I go with my Storm Sorcerer setup, as the only way I'm gonna break these unstoppable stacks is with Magic Missile. I also am going to make use of an item that I picked up a while ago, but didn't mention since it's been completely irrelevant until now, the Helmet of Grit. In order to one-turn Orin, I need to be able to cast 4 spells simultaneously on my opening turn. Usually with this build, I can only cast at most 3 with my 2 actions and my bonus action using Quicken Spell. But with this helmet, I can gain another bonus action, allowing me to get another Quicken Spell cast off, giving me enough damage to delete Orin completely. After all my setup, I use Magic Missile 2 times in a row to break all of Orin's unstoppable stacks, and then use 2 lightning spells to finish her off. I then clear out the remaining Ballists and claim the last Netherstone. So, with all the Netherstones in hand, I could go straight to the brain, but I have one last stop to make. I return to the Murder Tribunal as I did not kill Sarevok earlier. I take out Sarevok using the same Lightning Burst strategy, and then prepare to take on the final encounter of the game. I swap back to my assassin build, head for the Morphic Pool, have a bit of a goofy battle against the Brain Rats, and then leave to confront the Brain. I sneak by the Intellect Devourer Swarm because I can't be bothered to deal with this encounter and confront the Brain. I unfortunately don't pass all of the Domination dice rolls, which, while unlikely, would have made my life a little bit easier, and get pulled into the Prism. Once there, I tell the Emperor to piss off and free Orpheus, letting Orpheus sacrifice himself and become an Illithid. I choose to do this for two reasons. Number one, I don't like the Emperor, and so I want the opportunity to kill him in the final fight. And number two, because while I can't use Illithid powers myself, having Orpheus as an Illithid gives me access to all the powers, which will be very helpful for the final encounter. With Orpheus free, I leave the Prism, receive my allies' buffs, and start heading towards the final battle. I sneak around the edge of the castle, since while I could slowly isolate and pick off each of the enemies here, I don't really feel like fighting a bunch of nothing enemies when the finish line is so close in front of me. I reach the Brainstem, have Orpheus fly up to skip the stairway, and then turn both myself and Orpheus invisible before ascending the Brain. Because we're both invisible, I am not pulled directly into combat, and thus am able to fully buff myself up. I use all my buffs and have Orpheus apply Volatile Shield and Enhanced Perilous Stakes onto my character. I then surprise the enemies and begin the final battle. I have Orpheus lower the dragon's AC and stun it to prevent it from using its legendary action. I then walk myself up into Aura of Murder range, and essentially delete every single enemy atop the Brain in one turn. Next turn, I finish off the remaining enemies, and have Orpheus begin the channel to take the fight to the Brain itself. Inside the Brain's psyche, I utilize everything I have to deal as much as I can to the Brain. And while I'm not fully able to defeat the Brain on my first damage round, I avoid the Orbs of Negation, and once its defenses drop, say goodbye to the Brain. And that's it. The challenge is finally done. I do hope you enjoyed this video, as making it was a new experience for me given how different this was from my usual videos. Also, I obviously had to cut out a whole lot of stuff to keep this video reasonably length. So, for those of you who would like to watch a full, unedited VOD of this run, don't you worry. I'll be uploading the full VODs once I record some commentary over them, since I didn't talk at all while I was actually playing. Also, I've started a Patreon page, and if you really like my videos and would like to support me monetarily, your donations would be greatly appreciated. I'll be using Patreon to post behind the scenes content, and my image assets like the Pokédex entries that I made for this video. So, if you want to see that kind of stuff, or you just want to support me, consider subscribing to my Patreon. Well, that's all for me. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want more like it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!